Howdy and welcome back. We are here to close out the week on the English track of AWS On Air. Rob, I can't believe we are here at day 3 of week 1 of reInvent. Those are words I never thought I would utter just a few days ago or in past years where reInvent was only ever 1 week. Probably wondering who we are here on the broadcast. Hi, my name is Nick Walsh, developer advocate here at Amazon Web Services. And joining me as my partner in crime for the next 45, 60 minutes is Rob Zhu over there. Rob, how has reInvent been for you so far?
Oh man, the time machine effect of 2020 is still in full swing. I don't know whether it felt like a really long week or a really short week. I just can't tell anymore. I give up.
Yeah, there has certainly been a lot to unpack, and we will not be able to get to everything in this quick segment that we have here, but we will try our best. Again, AWS On Air being the official live stream track here at reInvent 2020. If you've arrived onto this channel, well, welcome. You are in the right spot. If you enjoy this content, we have an entire lineup that will be live, not quite 24/7, but through all of the active days and hours throughout the night. Of these 3 weeks of reInvent. We have a full up-to-date schedule on the AWS News blog. We'll try to get a link to that somewhere, but if you search for that, you find that URL, you're here in the dashboard here in Kaltura, you're at the right place. This channel will stay exactly where it is. So we hope to stick around and to see you back in some of those other sessions. But Rob, we are here for our weekly recap. A lot has gone down this week. We've seen 2 keynotes, a large number of sessions that have debuted in the catalog. We've been doing quite a bit of work here on the AWS On Air channel. Where do we even begin to try and recap this in case folks have not seen anything yet?
I think we just go in chronological order, starting with the keynote recap from Andy Jassy on Tuesday. Yeah, I'll just dive right in here. I mean, Andy kind of right out of the gate started talking about the culture of reinvention. He lists 8 keys to unlocking a culture of reinvention at your company. Just kind of, I'll go over a couple of these, and then I think we can kind of pick our favorite ones, discuss more if you want. But he talks about the will to reinvent. It really has to come from within the company. Any sort of consultants driving this from the outsider is not going to make this work. It's got to come from within the company, a fundamental desire to change. You can't fight gravity. He used this great example of Netflix cannibalizing their own DVD rental business because they saw streaming as the future. And then, he talked about talent that's really kind of hungry to reinvent. Now, Nick, I know you have some thoughts about that. What did you think about that one? That one's a really interesting one to me.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, you can have the desire for top-down change, and in many ways, there are a lot of barriers that exist if you don't have top-level buy-in. But at the end of the day, the boots on the ground that are going to be implementing the change, that are going to be using many of the tools that we talk about and discuss here on AWS On Air and that are launched in these keynotes, is going to be your end operators, these practitioners, right? If we're talking machine learning, maybe it's your analysts, maybe it's your, some of these newest manage workflows for Apache Airflow. Your data engineers may be utilizing that. Or, folks with titles like backend engineer, they may be dealing with everything across this wide and deep pool of services that we offer here at AWS. So it's sort of a 2-pronged approach. For deep levels of reinvention and innovation, you kind of want it all. And I know that sounds a little selfish in a way to say, but top level sort of buy-in so that you have a well thought out strategy, but also you really need folks who at the end of the day are inspired and are willing to be picking up new tools, are willing to solve these problems on behalf of their own customers. And sort of the challenge to us here at AWS is to design tools that they enjoy using. The developer experience is what sort of makes or breaks their thoughts on many of these products. And so we try to do our best job to collect that feedback and design those products that are pleasing to use, not just solving the business problems.
Yeah, well said. And kind of counterweighing that point about getting talent that's hungry to reinvent is to make sure that the talent that you are getting is reinventing for the right reasons, right? You don't want resume-driven development happening in your company on your watch. You don't want people who are constantly jumping at the next new thing, basically being distracted by every single squirrel they see run across the road. That's not a good model for a development team or an engineering culture for that matter, right? you really want to solve real customer problems. You want to focus on what it is that makes your business so special and try and relentlessly carve away anything that is not within that core target customer base. And this is something that we see a lot at Amazon, right? With this concept of customer obsession in our leadership principle.
Yeah, exactly. Again, you shouldn't expect some of the folks that are the boots on the ground or in their individual dev cycles to make these wide sweeping architectural decisions that, especially at large companies and enterprises, will have outstanding effects on numerous teams, right? This is sort of why I think emphasizing this two-pronged assault, the top down from the leadership perspective and the bottom up, should be important. But again, when we see like working backwards documents and specking out features for customers, that never starts with, okay, yeah, the customer will love that we're using containers, right? No, it starts with physical design, measurable design experiences, measurably designed experience for the customer. Like it will take X number of seconds for something to load, or it will be available in these regions, right? Now, these technologies are a means to an end, and I think it's easy to lose sight of that, especially here at a conference where we may be talking a lot about really shiny, exciting picks and shovels, but don't forget that these become released and are fine-tuned through the customer feedback of trying to deeply understand the problems and features that customers are trying to build. I know Kubernetes is extremely hot, but that, much like containers or AWS Lambda, serverless, what have you, like try to avoid the allure and cult of personality around services and really try to dissect what about that will help you solve your problem.
Yeah, means to an end, I think, is the name of the game. Whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in industrial manufacturing, you're in hospitality, you're in travel, you're in gaming, your customers, talk to them. Ask them if they care about whether your architecture is a monolith or a microservice, and they will glaze over. And if they do know what those things are, they still probably won't care. What they will care about are things like latency, usability, responsiveness, availability on different platforms. And so we really have to see these kinds of things that AWS provides as means to an end. How exactly does AWS enable you to be customer obsessed for your target audience?
Exactly.
And yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, flying through some of the points, I think it's 5 was speed from Andy, 6 was don't complexify, 7, use the platform with the broadest and deepest set of tools, and 8 being pulling everything together. Really, if I try to tie these together as quickly as possible, when we're thinking about speed, the ability to select tools that enable you or processes that enable you to deploy frequently, to be able to ship features quickly in response to your users is extremely important, right? If you get feedback and say, all right, well, we don't have deployments until another 10 days from now, even if your developers have authored the feature, if your ops pipeline or your build, test, deploy pipeline is held up, that's never good for your end users. And so being able to acknowledge that speed is important and maximize for it where possible is also magnified by using a platform like AWS that enables you a set of individual services that play very well together to reduce that friction, right? If you want to deploy a new microservice, you have let's say it's serverless with Lambda and Dynamodb, you have the tie-ins with CloudWatch, you have all of these other affordances that make you feel confident from a security perspective, from an availability perspective, and so on and so forth, that you don't have to look for an entirely new platform each time you want to build a new service or a new feature. AWS should comfortably be able to cover all of your bases there.
Absolutely. And speaking of some of these services that you will be using, almost inevitably, you're going to be using some sort of compute service on AWS. And here, we think of compute services as broken down into 3 broad categories: instances, containers, and serverless. And I am just blown away by the announcements across these 3 categories. Starting off with instances, I mean, here we have the launch of our Graviton 2 custom chip. These Graviton 2, by the way, Graviton 2 is a custom CPU. It's an ARM-based chip. And what that means is that we have a new generation of EC2 instances that run on this CPU. And this instance type provides a 40% better price performance ratio than the last generation on EC2, which, by the way, was no slacker. And we see this kind of leaning into custom silicon even more with all the cool stuff that Annapurna Labs is doing. We also have improvements on the networking side for instances. For example, we have the P4D instance, which now offers 400 gigabit per second, or gigabit per second, I'm sorry, networking speed. And now, what that means is that we have instances that really cover the spectrum of instances that have the highest amount of memory, largest amount of local storage, most powerful ML training instances, most powerful inference instances as well with the Inf1 chip. How can I forget? For the first time ever, Mac OS support, the ability to basically provision a Mac virtual machine and run that as part of your EC2 infrastructure.
Exactly. That one was launched, I believe, at AWS Late Night by Dave Brown, VP of Compute Services, if I'm not mistaken. Certainly a day that not many people would have predicted would have come, the ability to in an elastic way, on demand, pay as you go, be able to provision Mac OS instances and have them truly fully reset or factory reset each time you spin them down and spin them back up. Again, I think the main use case here being for build, test, deploy, and code signing applications. But again, for the alternatives that a lot of customers were having to deal with, which is managing your own server farms of Mac OS devices. A lot of the value of cloud and separation of shared responsibility model is certainly a value proposition that customers have seemed to enjoy, at least from the feedback that I've seen so far.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think one area that specifically benefits from these advances in compute is AI and ML workloads. And here we have two exciting new announcements. One is the Habana Gaudi-based EC2 instance in collaboration with Intel. This is custom silicon from Intel that provides a further significant price performance improvement over other GPU-attached instances in EC2. And then we have AWS Trainium. This is an ML training chip that, again, is designed to deliver extremely cost-effective training in the cloud. So, anybody who's doing any work in the AI ML space on AWS should be really excited and take a deeper look at these announcements.
Yeah, exactly. Again, Graviton 2 instances going live earlier this year was very exciting. And from what I've seen, AWS Trainium stands to serve a very similar purpose on the training half of the machine learning equation. So be very excited to get my hands on that. But moving down the stack here for the compute launches, we also saw in the container space, this was certainly an exciting week for many of folk. We saw both ECS Anywhere and Amazon ECS Anywhere and Amazon EKS Anywhere launching. Now, this was valuable for quite a few reasons, but even just describing what these launches are will speak to the gravity of how exciting or how much value exists here. A lot of developers have really enjoyed working with the ECS APIs, working with the EKS APIs. And what these launches enable you to do is actually have those services available open source with those bindings. And so if you enjoy or you have, let's say, a hybrid architecture, you can standardize on a single set of APIs for orchestrating and managing your container-based workloads in ECS and EKS, both for on-prem and for AWS managed deployments. So very, very exciting. And I think that with the announcement this week, customers will, over the coming weeks, be getting their hands dirty with that and being able to set up some of these hybrid deployments themselves. And I'm very excited to see that.
Yeah, definitely. Already we're hearing incredible amounts of feedback from customers around what this means when we have EKS Anywhere and ECS Anywhere. It's really kind of a game changer.
Certainly, and the word game changer is not one we throw around lightly, but there's a launch in the third category that I think is quite fitting of that name, and that being 1 millisecond granularity billing for AWS Lambda. Now, again, for anyone who may not be familiar, AWS Lambda is our serverless ability to run arbitrary snippets of code, and then there's lots of affordances on top of that, but largely is a functions as a service plus offering. And the most important part, I would say, is the fact that it bills you only for the compute seconds that are used in this event-driven or manually triggered workflow. Now, when you're only paying for the time that these functions execute, you really are basically bound on the minimum payment side to whatever the minimum granularity is. So previously to this, 100 milliseconds was the granularity or the minimum billing time, I believe. And so if you had extremely efficient functions that execute very quickly, you would be built up to the initial 100 milliseconds. Why 1 millisecond is a game changer here is that for any customers that had Lambda functions that would execute in, let's say, 10 milliseconds, 25 milliseconds, 50 milliseconds. They're getting orders of magnitude cheaper. Their bills are being reduced by orders of magnitude here. For 50 milliseconds, that's a 50% reduction, and so on and so forth. Even more extensive the quicker your Lambda functions could run. Being able to more deeply deliver on the promise of only paying for what you use is one that is certainly hard work on the back end from some of the folks that worked on that one. But we are always ecstatic to bring that to customers, and we've seen some graphs. I've personally seen some graphs on social media of cost savings where the daily cost just falls off a cliff for some of these highly tuned, highly performant Lambda functions that customers have authored and executed.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I also heard that there was a container support for Lambda that just launched. What's up with that, Nick?
Yeah, so that's a great question. What's up with that? I think that a lot of folks who have been running Lambda functions previously have, if you've run functions extensively on Lambda, you may have at some point or another run up to some of the execution limits or configuration limits. Namely, those are the maximum memory size for a particular container, or simply having to repackage what could have already been a containerized workload to then run with inside of Lambda with the Lambda runtime. And that transformation, while it may not be significant in many cases, is a point of friction for being able to arbitrarily bring code to execute, right? And so folks have loved the entire serverless and Lambda ecosystem. And now with Lambda container support, what this enables developers to do is use all of those affordances in the lifecycle management and event triggers that they know and love for S3, and again, just all of the developer experience that has been finely tuned in Lambda, now just broadening what you can, what sort of code you can bring to the table there in the form of, I believe, Docker containers. Again, just opening up customer choice here, right? This serverless, obviously here we've broken it out, and Andy broke it out from containers broadly, but just offering more and more options for developers to find the service that fits the technical requirements, but also enables them to have sort of these personal preferences with respect to which set of tools feel better in the hand to use of their developers.
Yeah, definitely. And now what's really interesting to me is what this means is that, we had Fargate, which uses containers as the primitive concept, and then it overlays on top of that kind of like a serverless operating model, and then we have serverless as the primitive, and then which now supports containers coming from Lambda, and the two have met in the middle. This is so exciting. This is like, the reason why it's exciting is because customers have been asking for this for a long time, right? This feedback of when will we get container support in Lambda has been around since the birth of Lambda. Let's face it. And it's really, really cool to see the team finally launch this. I know that the team has been hard at work at this since they heard that feedback. And so it's really exciting to see this happen so quickly. Another interesting announcement in the serverless space is a new service called Aws Proton. And this is a fully managed deployment service for your microservice backends. The problem here is that when you buy into these microservice architectures, you have dependencies, chains of dependencies, right? Your front end might depend on a cache, might depend on an analytics service, might depend on this, might depend on that. And if you were to draw it out on a graph, you can kind of pick out parts of these that need to be deployed as cohesive units when you update one or the other. And this becomes an operational challenge. And in fact, this is, I think, where a lot of the trough of disillusionment comes from, when people kind of jump on the microservice bandwagon, and then several months in, they're like, wait a minute, what did I do? I have no idea what's going on with my infrastructure. And I think Proton can really help those customers realize the full benefit of microservices. It really helps smooth out that adoption curve, because that was really kind of a missing piece in my mind, was when you deploy these microservices, how do you do consistent deployment of stacks of dependencies? And Proton has the answers. So really excited to see that happen. And we have deep dive sessions. I have a deep dive session breakout that we'll go into later, but suffice to say, you should definitely take a look at our catalog, our session catalog, for a deep dive into Proton.
Yeah, quite excited to see how organizations and customers that have mature serverless and microservice implementations will use Proton to help to detangle some of their tracing and observability, or even just their deployment pipelines for those microservices. But again, moving on, there were so many launches in this keynote, and again, as we've come to expect from Andy, nothing out of the ordinary here. In the storage and databases world, there were some exciting ones, even if a lot of them are changes to parameters and configurations. These are all launches that affect dollars in pocket at the end of the day, and I think that anybody who pays a bill here for AWS will care about these. So first up is going to be the Gp3 volumes, again, an upgrade from GP2 over in the Elastic Block Store Amazon EBS space. So the primary two benefits here to this upgrade are first, 20% lower cost per gigabyte. Again, EBS being this persistent data store that attaches to your compute infrastructure in EC2 and beyond. 20% cost savings on that storage is nothing to scoff at. It's essentially just a 20% cost savings in your pocket. But it's more than just cost savings, right? Because there is the ability to provision your IOPS and your storage separately. Now, this is a recurring trend for anybody that has been following databases and data storage and any sort of access layer on top of them for decades now, right? The ability to separate your concerns of just because I want to store more data doesn't mean that I need to be transacting on that data at an increasingly or a directly correlated rate. So what typically has happened is that customers over provision to meet the peak for one of the two, and they end up overpaying for latent resources in the second. No longer for Elastic Block Store with GP3, customers can now provision IOPS and storage separately. So very, very exciting there. But in addition to that, we have a launch in the SANS space in the IO2 Block Express. Rob, this is the first SAN built for the cloud from what I'm hearing, but do you have any more context on that?
Yeah, I mean, we'll just start with the stats. The IO2 Block Express service is you can think of it as a large EBS volume, but it supports up to 256,000 IOPS with a throughput of 4,000 megabytes per second. So this is some seriously high IOPS and throughput that you can get out of this thing. And again, I mean, going back to your point, Nick, this is elasticity that folks that have operated on premise have struggled with for a long time, because traditional SANs, they're expensive. If you want to expand them, they have to be expanded in blocks, and often each block costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And then you have the equipment and the maintenance and all that stuff around it. So SANs they run extremely critical workloads. You don't really reach for them unless you have some serious data storage needs, some serious throughput needs. And now we're taking all that power and we're providing it in an elastic model with IO2 block storage. So this is a huge step forward in the storage space.
Yeah, exactly. I know that a lot of customers that may be used to some of the bells and whistles in the AWS managed storage categories can come to expect in 2021 for IO2 Block Express being multi-attach, IO fencing, fast snapshot restore, and elastic volume. So despite the fact that some of those features may not be available today in IO2 Block Express, there's no sense in reinventing the wheel, right? If you know that those are on the horizon and you can plan accordingly, you may be able to make your engineering design decisions a bit more upstream and forego utilizing another implementation that may not be exactly what you wanted. So always nice to see breaking out some of those promises into the coming year. But we have a few other launches in the database and storage space. These made quite a few waves. First I'll talk about here is the new Amazon Aurora Serverless v2. As its name implies, obviously this is a significant update to Amazon Aurora's serverless cluster configuration. Again, traditionally with Amazon Aurora, you provision a number of instances in a cluster. You can enable auto scaling. You can have all of the typical affordances for being able to have AWS manage that scaling up and down. But there is no better way to manage scaling than to not have to manage it at all in a fully serverless offering. And so this is the promise of what Amazon Aurora Serverless has delivered for customers. But in those scaling mechanisms, customers have given us feedback that sometimes if they get a significant spike in traffic that could be orders of magnitude greater than what their steady state transactions look like, that scale up could result in some greater latency while the scale up is occurring. So we've listened deeply to that, and Amazon Aurora Serverless V2 is able to scale to hundreds of thousands of transactions in a fraction of a second. So no longer do customers have to forego using all of the peace of mind with a serverless offering and having to trade that off for latency during a traffic spike. Aurora Serverless V2 really seems to sort of nip that problem in the bud and allow customers to not have to make that trade-off.
Yeah, that's an exciting announcement for Aurora Serverless for sure. And Aurora already one of our fastest growing services in the history of AWS. What I find really interesting about Aurora Serverless and its more responsive scaling to traffic is that, you mentioned earlier that sometimes customers will over provision resources and they just kind of pay for unused capacity. And that's the reality let's just take the retail space, for example, right? We know that there is huge difference in seasonal volume for retailers. And this shows up in their graphs and their infrastructure costs. And it's been kind of a pipe dream for a lot of customers in this space to just right size their bill to what they use. But in reality, what they do is they set up a database in a certain configuration for a certain number of requests per second, certain number of reads, certain number of writes, certain configuration of read replicas. And then they just don't want to touch it anymore because there's such a huge trade-off. It's like, oh, okay, well, we could save a couple of dollars on our monthly bill. Okay, well, I mean, maybe a couple of $1 million, but now who wants to touch the read replica configuration, right? Who wants to be on the hook for that when that thing results in the website going down and us not being able to take orders? Now, that's not even a concern here anymore. That's really the power, right? If we really kind of put ourselves in the customer's shoes, this is the direction that Aurora Serverless is heading in, and it's a world that I want to live in. So I'm really excited about this announcement.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've got just a few more here in the storage space before we continue. But, again, ultimately, the word over provision sort of sounds like an accident or sounds like the wrong thing. But if you're on premises, you do this sort of by design. You're not every day accepting a new shipment of racks for your servers that you are then just iteratively adding over and over. You typically do year-long planning. You estimate for the peak at the end of the year, and then you grow into that. That's inherently over provisioning, right? You've paid up front, or you're paying to keep them online even while you're not using them. So if customers are still on premises, that term over provisioning is sort of by design happening in your facilities.
Yeah, and it's just not just capacity planning, right? I mean, in a previous job, we would do capacity planning and we would have the order ready to go, and it would be 6 months before it was racked and stacked. So it's really, if you look at what it takes to get this thing done right on-prem, it's a whole different world. Moving on to, so one of the things that happens when you have a really comprehensive set of requirements for data management is that you end up with data that kind of gets spread across a whole number of different data stores, right? You might end up with data that's in your relational database. You might have data that's spread across your NoSQL store. You might have data that's in your time stream database. And the thing is that this is actually a sign that you're in the right direction, because all of these databases have different strengths and weaknesses, and you don't want to use a hammer and turn everything into a nail, right? But at the same time, when you use purpose-built data stores, you end up with a different problem, which is that how do you conduct BI workloads that span across these different data stores? And that's where we have a new service launch called AWS Glue Elastic Views. Now, Glue is our ETL service. And what this lets you do is basically transform data from one form into another. ETL, by the way, stands for extract, transform, and load. And you can think of this as kind of like data sanitization to get it into the right form. But it's more than that. It also allows you to join data. And this is, Elastic Views, my guess is that this kind of came from the concept of materialized views from the SQL world, right? Because, but except that now you can do this across a variety of data stores. And of course, it's all natively integrated with all the different data offerings that we have on AWS. So I think this is going to be a pretty big move forward for customers who have data requirements, and especially large amounts of data that spans these different kinds of data stores.
Yeah, exactly. And your point around materialized views and the familiarity to the SQL world is no stranger to some other materialized views features at AWS, namely in Amazon Redshift, our data warehousing solution. So, the big jump from Redshift to AWS Glue is that Glue is entirely serverless. So when you're performing this ETL where you're pulling the data from a particular source, you're creating a materialized view or an elastic view. Maybe you're outputting it somewhere. This is all done without having to necessarily determine what type of instances will be in your cluster. This is all of that is handled under the hood by AWS, and will scale up and down to something that's essentially a tangible metric, right? How many transactions do you want to be able to perform, or abstracted units of compute? And AWS manages all of that cluster to those exact transactions, or it manages all the underlying infrastructure to those exact transactions. You don't have to worry about leaving some of your infrastructure running after a job is completed or anything.
Yeah, definitely. Now, Nick, I understand that we have a slew of exciting announcements in the AI/ML space. You want to take us through those?
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm gonna trample all over you here. I'm gonna fly through them because this is my wheelhouse. I love AI/ML, and these launches, not just their names, but sort of the problems they solve, are ones that I know I've never wanted to solve or author code to do. So being able to see those embedded where I'm performing my machine learning in Sagemaker already is a breath of fresh air for me. So first up, we have Amazon SageMaker Datawrangler, probably one of my favorite names, because when I get up on stage and I'm trying to help people understand AI and machine learning, there's no other way I would describe what it looks like to deal with production data in the wild, right? We maybe train our first model on a very simple data set that's already pruned and curated and nice and neat, but that doesn't help you get prepared for the real world. In the real world, data is messy. You're going to be importing data from multiple different silos that could have different levels of encoding. Like a date could be a string in one data silo, and it could be, it could be a different format in another, what have you. And ultimately, some of this data cleaning is less about being particularly opinionated and more just about eliminating all of the gotchas. Like, oh, do I have missing elements in this row? Is my data normalized? So on and so forth. So being able to have a service like Datawrangler that can identify all of those common problems, that can easily, in a sort of abstracted way, handle all the underlying infrastructure for it and just solve my problem is all I really care about. Data scientists spend so much time working and wrangling with their data and massaging it into a form that they know they want to plug into their machine learning algorithms. And so by listening to customers and hearing that this is one of the biggest hurdles and where they spend their time, getting Datawrangler in their hands is something that we're very excited about. Now, one more step down the ladder here or rather down the pipeline is the release of Amazon SageMaker Feature Store. Now, the primary motivation here being that in a multitude of machine learning models to perform inference downstream, you need to pull particular characteristics or features, as they're called. Think of these as variables in an equation where the output is the inference or the prediction, and all of the weights and all of that are determined by the training process. Now, in a lot of mature organizations, what we find is that you may have multiple models that share common features. Now, previous to this, you could simply completely treat each of those pipelines as isolated. And what that means is that you would have duplicate feature stores that you need to pay to manage those data pipelines separately. What Amazon SageMaker Feature Store does is it is purpose-built for solving this exact problem. So at mature organizations where you're reusing certain parameters across the organization, you can more effectively be able to share those features and those variables. What this also enables you to do is more easily correlate data from other sources rather than having to duplicate it just because it lives somewhere else and will fit into your pipeline. So very excited for this one. And again, optimizing for low latency being extremely critical here, because you don't want to add extra time spent, fetching data from disk, right? You want to be able to make this as quick as possible.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, so just to be clear, when we think about AI and ML services, we've seen the way that the way we think about AI and ML services at AWS is in 3 tiers, right? At the lowest level of abstraction, we have the AI and ML frameworks, your TensorFlow, your PyTorch, MXNet. And there, what we offer is the ability to have the right-sized instance, elastic capacity, attached GPUs, hardware like the Inf1 chip, and then soon to be available the Habana-based EC2 instances from Intel. All that stuff, basically the right-sized hardware for you to run your workloads if you're a true hands-on expert. And then kind of one layer of abstraction up, we have Sagemaker, which is our one-stop shop for all your machine learning workflow needs. There's so much more than just kind of acquiring an instance, launching an instance, and then doing some machine learning on it, right? Because that's really just one very, very narrow slice of the life cycle. And that's really what kind of Nick was talking about, is that Sagemaker is what we call the ML IDE, right? It's a studio that basically incorporates all these features for the end-to-end life cycle of what a machine learning workload looks like, from training to revision, to refining the model, to deploying into production, to scaling, to monitoring, and then iterating on that. But we know that both of those layers, both SageMaker and AI/ML frameworks, requires trained machine learning experts and data scientists, and there just aren't that many of those. And we think that AI and ML needs to be much more accessible. That's why we also have a third layer of abstraction, which is our turnkey AI services. And you don't need to know anything about AI or ML to use these. And a lot of these are just kind of workhorse services at this point, right? Lex, Poly, Transcribe. But a relatively new one is Codeguru. Now, Codeguru is an AI-powered code review tool. And a couple months ago, we launched Codeguru for Java, or with Java support. Actually, I think it was over a year ago now. You might want to fact check me on that. But it used to, when Codeguru launched, the only language it supported was Java. But now we've launched Codeguru with support for Python. We know there are a lot of Python developers out there. It's an incredibly popular language, and I think it is the fastest growing language by quite a margin. And not only did we launch Codeguru for Python, but we also launched it with another feature called Security Detector, so that for both Java and Python, Codeguru will detect lines of code that might be introducing security issues into your program.
Yeah, exactly. Developments across the entire stack. And I think one of the most seminal ones for SageMaker, again, folks that are trying to train their own models, and even that as a descriptor no longer pins you in the SageMaker camp, because some of the fully managed AI services at the top layer offer custom training, like recognition, custom labels, custom poly identities for voices, is Amazon SageMaker pipelines. Again, both of the two things I described prior, those launches, SageMaker Datawrangler and SageMaker Feature Store, are parts of pipelines that customers are implementing. But what we're looking at here is similar to what Proton does for management and deployment and CI/CD for microservices, is a full end-to-end, easy-to-use CI/CD service for machine learning pipelines. Now, there are a lot of ways that different organizations have been doing this prior, but there are some common trends, and we see those reflected in sort of what the standardized pipelines look like here in SageMaker pipelines. So, an example here being, you start with Datawrangler to process your data that gets sent to Feature Store, and then you can use that to train and retrain models with SageMaker. And then SageMaker can also deploy those models as their own endpoints. Recently, a few months ago, we released multi-model endpoints, or multi-endpoint, multi-model endpoints. Yeah. So lots of excitement there. Lastly, I'll say here in the AI and ML space, sometimes it's not a standalone AI ML service, but how it's utilized and wrapped into another service. And in that, we can talk about Amazon QuickSight Q. Amazon QuickSight Q reminds me a bit about Kendra, actually, our natural language search and information discoverability service. But with QuickSight Q, what it enables customers to do is ask any question in natural language and get answers in seconds. So, it's kind of like a natural language, or like worldly information engine, right? And it can auto-generate the data models, and it understands meanings and relations of data. And this entire hierarchy that a lot of organizations may try to extensively invest time to prune manually is now done automatically for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we could spend hours talking about the future launches. But really, I think the point we need to stress is that while we at AWS launch a lot of these features and services, we know that that's really not the end of the story. That's really kind of just one point on the spectrum. And we know that shipping a set of APIs, some documentation, some white papers, that's a great place to start, but that is definitely not where we can end. And really, to kind of make sure that you are successful along the entire lifetime of the cloud journey, we leverage our partners in the partner ecosystem. And that's why the keynote from this morning was entirely focused on the partner and ISV ecosystem. Nick, what do you say we go and break down some of the major announcements from the partner keynote today?
Yeah, definitely. Again, week one, we had two keynotes, Andy's and the partner keynote led by Doug Yum, head of the global partner organization here at AWS. And what was very clear here is that AWS, in order to best serve customers, is incentivized to have deep relationships with ISVs and SaaS providers and these partners, where there's a symbiotic relationship that ultimately delivers the best experience for customers. So while many of the launches that Andy talked about on Monday may directly go into the hands of individual developers, there is a thriving ecosystem of companies whose names you've certainly worked with that may be using these features to deliver a better experience while benefiting from these features in the cloud, right? So we saw from the likes of Cohesity, a data backup and management SaaS provider that launched data management as a service today to solve the problem of mass data fragmentation. Again, this may be a broad enough topic out in the wild and challenge for organizations that it may be difficult for, the Cohesity has a thesis for how to solve that, and we're super happy to be along on the journey with them. There were a handful of launches here in the partner space that I think, again, will probably be the most prominent things to talk about, though. I think the first one was managed entitlements for the AWS marketplace. This enabling SaaS providers and ISVs the ability to manage license distribution more easily between on-prem and cloud deployments, and to tap into AWS License Manager, the purpose-built upstream service here on AWS that can make it straightforward and improve the governance, the ease of being able to have governance over those licenses.
Yeah, that exactly, and not just that. I mean, you can issue licenses, you can use licenses as models, but I think the other side of the coin is that the marketplace has been incredibly popular for finding off-the-shelf software solutions and SaaS providers that can support those solutions. But one thing that's been missing from that piece is the pro serve segment, right? When you want to find, in addition to just software that runs as a service, what about people that offer these services, right? We mentioned earlier, for example, that there is more demand for machine learning experts than there is supply. Well, it turns out that our partner ecosystem has some of these experts, and if what you need is somebody to kind of come on site and do an architecture evaluation with you, or sit with your team for 6 months to make sure that the implementation and the rollout goes smoothly, we've always had that. That's always been a critical part of the AWS partner ecosystem. But what we're announcing today is professional services in AWS Marketplace, which means that you can find and buy these kinds of assessments, implementation support, managed services right from the same console.
Yeah, I think the easiest way to understand this one is that when you want to make something, for example, let's say hot dogs, right? You wouldn't want to have to go to two entirely different stores, one to buy the meat and another to buy the buns. And consequently, even if they were in the same store, well, wouldn't it be quite convenient if they were located in aisles that were right next to one another? And I think that this sort of feedback of, when we're talking about subscription software through ISVs and SaaS providers, the services that go along with them are hand in hand. So again, this is solving a very tangible sort of separation of codependent items that customers that ISVs are providing, customers are purchasing, and just moving them all under one roof to consolidate billing and to just reduce friction really across the board there.
Yeah, definitely. And then I also understand that we had a fireside chat with Andy Jassy. Nick, do you have the 411 on that?
Yeah, there was a lot that Andy went over, and there was a lot of harkening back to some of the points that were actually made in his keynote on day one, which had a lot of applications to partners and ISVs. But I think that one of the most impactful segments for me was sort of exposing how a lot of what we are undergoing here at Amazon in the climate with the last year is not too dissimilar from what we know ISVs and partners may be undergoing, and ultimately their end customers. And so by talking about trying to deeply listen and understand their needs and as a result their customers' needs, we have worked to be able to help reduce services that and features that help do things like help scale down, right? I think that in the past, there are a lot of companies that keep thinking, what if their scale goes up and up and up? But this last year, certain companies may have seen a massive spike in traffic, but others may have wanted to scale down to meet this trough of demand or these differently shaped workloads. And this has been unlike any other years, right? And so sharing sort of how forward looking that is and being able to accelerate this adoption to the cloud to meet those concerns, some visible and some maybe unforeseeable, was something that we think about deeply here at Amazon for ourselves as well. So in a way, a vulnerable moment, but to show that we feel and experience these and have as much of a vested interest in solving them for ourselves as we do for our customers and for ISVs and partners in this entire ecosystem.
Yeah, it's always great to hear from Andy. He's got his finger on the pulse of the industry and he's seen it all. And so it's really nice to see these fireside chats where he just kind of lays it all out and talks candidly with you. Always nice to hear from him. So Nick, let's change tracks a little bit. I understand that we have AWS on-air programming that's happening next week as well. Can we give the viewer a preview of that so they know what to expect?
Yeah, certainly. So, if you're here on this broadcast, as long as you're not watching this on demand, you're in the right place. You're here at AWS On Air. It's the official live stream track at Reinvent. I mentioned it at the top of the broadcast, but we have a multitude of different series that will be running live throughout the entirety of Reinvent. Just this week, earlier on, those have dropped off the schedule now, but we have everything from keynote recaps to deep dives with service teams around some of these newly announced services. We got to hear from a roundtable of a lot of the community heroes earlier today and get their impressions of some of the launches at Reinvent. That was quite fun. Again, extending sort of down here, we have industry live recaps. So it can certainly be a lot to try and keep up with all of these various different service categories. But if you are in the travel and hospitality, or you are in the energy space, which we saw yesterday, these sessions are designed to sort of give you the recap of and contextualization of all of these launches. We have some other shows, like we saw Cohesity on Howdy Partner earlier today, talking about some of the launches and how it affects them as one of our partners. And then we had IoT All of the Things Special Projects Edition, focused on anyone out in the audience that is interested in Internet of Things. And here we are. The recap in English, Rob. I see that we've clarified that this is a recap in English, and I think that's for a pretty particular reason, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that we wanted to offer with the recaps this time around is to make sure that our global customers were being well served, and that's why we have localized recaps in 8 different languages. Is that right, Nick?
Yeah, going down, across the horn here, we have Japanese. These times all in Pacific Standard Time. Japanese at 7, Korean at 8, Italian at 2 a.m., German at 3, French at 4. And Portuguese and Spanish at 6 and 7 a.m. respectively. So again, if you're just waking up, maybe you're in one of those time zones, do not fret. We have a dedicated session led by developer advocates, just like us, just like Rob and I, that will be recapping all of this content in a time zone that may be a little bit easier for you to consume. Again, Reinvent is 3 weeks. It's a marathon and not a sprint, and we want to make sure that we can deliver this at your time and in a language that you may prefer.
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, we don't want to give you the impression that this is the bulk or even the most important bits of AWS. Of Reinvent. Far from it. In fact, Reinvent is a learning conference, and there is a huge catalog of content with more content being released every day, every week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday of every week. But once that content is premiered, then it is available on demand. You can go back and watch it if you missed it. In particular, the summary that we gave you today was mostly from the 2 recaps from Tuesday morning with Andy and then on Thursday morning with Doug. Now, I highly recommend that you go and watch those, because what we gave you here is definitely a lossy compression algorithm. In addition to that, there's a huge catalog of sessions that I mentioned, again, are constantly expanding. And these are the sessions that have the dive deep details that you need in order to understand what these launches mean for you, or to understand what it looks like to use one of these services hands-on. I just want to call out a couple that aired today and are now available online. One is open source observability at AWS. By the way, if these things sound interesting to you, just go into the Reinvent website, which you're probably on right now, and go into the search bar, in the search box in the upper right-hand corner of your browser, and just type in some of these keywords, and you're going to find them. Data modeling with Amazon Dynamodb. You probably heard that Dynamodb has this concept called a single table design, and how it differs from traditional databases, how you deal with consistency, how you deal with scalability. This is a 2-part series, highly recommended for anybody who is either interested in Dynamodb or is already relying on it. And then if you want to see what this looks like from a customer's perspective, we have a talk called How Disney Plus Scales Globally on Amazon DynamoDB. Now, if you're like me, you're watching Mandalorian, but as you're watching Mandalorian, you're like, how many other people are watching Mandalorian? How do they build the infrastructure to make sure that the stream stays at a high quality, right? And so, or maybe you're just enjoying Baby Yoda. I don't know. My point is that we've got customers and partners that are operating at truly global scale, and they're relying on services like DynamoDB to deliver a great customer experience, and you can hear from them firsthand about how they're accomplishing this. We also have a session called What's New in Amazon Aurora, and its related session, Deep Dive on Amazon Aurora with Postgres compatibility. Postgres really kind of the extremely popular and bedrock component of the relational database ecosystem, and Aurora supports Postgres compatibility. In other words, Aurora, again, part of our relational database service, one of our offerings, one of our engines, so to speak. But you can kind of deep dive into what this looks like when you kind of configure it for multi-AZ developed deployments, and you can take a look at what a reference architecture looks like. So highly recommended deep dive. We also have Getting Up and Running with Amazon ECS. And this is really kind of an intro level talk. It's a great way. I mean, you really can't lose when you think about what we have in the container space with respect to Fargate, ECS, and EKS. You kind of just gotta have to pick one and dive in, because in fact, once you understand one, if let's say you picked Fargate, right, and you say, hey, now I kind of grok Fargate, it's really easy to then explain ECS or EKS by contrast. And the benefit of ECS in particular is that it assumes that you are already an experienced containers operator, but then it has all of these native integrations with all of the other AWS services, right? So ECS is kind of this middle ground between our serverless container offering and EKS. And this is the way to get your feet wet and dive right in.
Rob, you forgot the newest container service, AWS Lambda.
That's true. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me.
Even more critical that you attend these to understand, by contrast, what option for deploying a container may be optimal for you, right? So
we have to, know what? We have to get Brent and Chris on here one day as guests so that we can talk about where exactly Lambda fits now. Are they willing to change allegiances?
I feel like we're like setting up the like the Rocky versus Ivan Drago to like the containers. Like, do you run it on Lambda? Do you run it on ECS, EKS, or But again, this more ways to give customers choice to sort of find what option works best for them, even if that involves oftentimes some challenges to figure out exactly what could be best. I think I'll take that challenge any day of the week over having fewer options to choose from.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just 2 more sessions I want to call out. And again, if this sounds interesting to you, just type in these search terms and you should be able to find it. The second to last one is Amazon Cloudfront Fundamentals. Again, another introductory level session that takes you into Cloudfront. This is our content distribution network. This is part of the Amazon global network, and it is a key piece of infrastructure to running things with high performance at web scale. And then finally, we have security best practices, the AWS well-architected way. The AWS well-architected program is a program that has a huge library of documentation and reference architectures and ways to kind of validate your architecture. Because we know that AWS is constantly changing, it's constantly launching new features, and it's a challenge to kind of stay up to date and make sure that you're always making the best use of the tools and services that we provide. At the same time, it's extremely important, right, for both cost savings, security, operational efficiency, capabilities that you never even knew existed. And the well-architected framework is a great way to dive into that. So security best practices within the well-architected framework, that's music to my ears. So definitely check that out.
Yeah, exactly. Being able to read the literature in the well-architected framework and learn and build your architecture from the shoulders of giants and feel very equipped that you're not just not doing something wrong, but that you have made deliberate choices in how you've laid out your architecture such that you feel confident in the choices that you've made. Always something that will pay off in spades, regardless of any one particular technology or any one particular shiniest new launch. A lot of the principles that are discussed in these well-architected or the builder's library and so on are fundamental to distributed systems design and cloud computing. So I definitely implore people to check that out.
Yeah. Well, Nick, I think we could sit here and talk all day about this stuff because there's just so much exciting stuff going on in AWS. But I think that about wraps it up for week one. Better that we voluntarily leave the stage rather than getting pulled off. But you know, again, I want to reiterate these session callouts. These are by no means the most important thing. These are my personal picks and an invitation for you to explore more. This platform was built with education and exploration in mind. So please take a look there, and then take a look at some of the related sessions. Take a look at the tracks that they're part of, and just click through and see where your curiosity brings you.
Yeah, exactly. Personal choice being a great topic for one thing I wanted to talk a little bit about before we close out. Obviously, we've spoken about being able to optimize the choose services that feel good in the hand to use. This has been a live broadcast all week. We've been taking some questions over at the AWS On Air Twitter account, and I figure we could play a little game here, Rob. And I don't know how fun a game is that you're not clued in on until you're an active participant in, but it's okay. I did your work this week for you. So on some of our shows, we like to take audience participation, and whether he realized it or not, he made his way onto AWS On Air. I did the liberty of, looking through all of the tweets from this week, and I pulled out a particular favorite. So without further ado, Rob, you want to give us a drum roll really quickly?
All right.
All right. And for my favorite tweet from the week, we have Corey Quinn, who asked folks to tweet an image, and he would name the AWS service that would be correlated with it. So here we have Corey Quinn with Sagemaker data recorder, with what looks like a very friendly duck over there playing a recorder. So Corey,
nightmares. Why did you show me that?
Corey, congratulations! You made it onto AWS On Air. You win tweet of the week here, at least in my humble opinion. So thank you, Corey, for that one. In just our final moments here, I apologize if Rob is now scarred for the next weekend. We have an industry live session to close out today after this recap for media and entertainment. That one's going to be hosted by MJ Bailey. You may have seen her earlier on in the week or on our Twitch channel as host of the CQ certification quiz show. So MJ will be joining us after we wrap up here. And then again, we will have our localized recaps all throughout the week. We have some exciting stuff on the schedule coming up for next Monday here, next Tuesday. More What's Next sessions, covering the latest launches, keynote worthy for the machine learning keynote that'll be happening on Tuesday, with quite a few of those launches being covered just a few hours later here on AWS On Air. So we are very excited for that, but it has been a very long week. We're going to take a bit of a break here, revitalize, re-energize. We will be handing you off to MJ over in the industry live session in just a minute. But Rob, any single closing thought?
Just to buckle up. I mean, next week, if you thought this week was something, then next week we have some seriously exciting announcements in store. Starting on Tuesday, I mean, like Nick said, with our keynote again, and then really just kind of going back up to 100%. I think we need these kinds of 4-day breaks between these sections, because otherwise, I don't know how anybody would keep up.
Exactly. Couldn't have said it better myself. It's a marathon, not a sprint. That's why I'm drinking tea out of a massive Pyrex to make sure my voice holds through the course of this. So, all right, it is the clock is dinging. We're at midnight here, not quite literally, but proverbially, of course. Signing off here from our weekly recap. Again, Nick, Walsh, and Rob Zhu, developer advocates at Amazon Web Services. Stick around. In just a minute, we'll be live with our industry live session for media and entertainment. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great weekend.